What's going on, guys? My name is Christopher and welcome to It's Complicated, the show where I talk about and showcase wristwatches. So if you love watches like I do, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button, then click on the bell and you'll be all set. Today I'm going to be showing off two vintage Rolex Submariner 5513s. Here we go. All right, so today I'm going to be showing you guys two Rolex Submariner 5513s. Now, before we get started, I want to let you guys know that these watches were provided to me by watchchest.com. A couple of good guys over there, so make sure to check them out. I'll put a link in the description below. The Rolex Submariner 5513 was made from 1962 until 1989. That is a 27-year run, and I believe it's one of the longest runs of any Rolex watch ever made, 27 years. Now, these are late 60s, early 70s models 5513. However, this one is the oldest one. And you can tell really by the end links. Look at that. The end links and the bracelet. You can see the rivets on the side of the bracelet there. And these links are just folded metal links. And same with this 5513 as well. It's just folded metal, hollow steel links. Certainly nothing like they're doing today. Another way you can tell this watch is older, other than the end links, is this clasp here. See that clasp? Very, very vintage. This one is much more modern, and that's not too dissimilar from what they were doing back in 1998. Also, on the Oyster bracelet here, the width is a little smaller than the width on that Oyster bracelet. But both of these watches are really, really cool. But again, just look at how these end links bounce all around. Pretty interesting for sure. I was just talking to a friend of mine about these watches and telling him how expensive they are, and he was checking them out going like, I don't understand why these are so expensive. And I told him collectors, collectors love these watches. Vintage Rolex is huge. But really, the more you check these watches out, the more you can see that these were a tool. This was a tool to tell the time. And a lot of soldiers in the Vietnam War would buy these at the PX, not because they were cool, because they needed to know what time it was. And of course, collectors today love them, and they love the old movement. Speaking of movement, these watches are using a Rolex in-house 1520 movement, which was one of the first in-house movements Rolex made, and it beats at 19.8 thousand beats per hour. Also, here's a picture of the movement from what I believe is this watch. Check it out. How cool is that, the 1520? Now, these watches back in the late 60s, early 70s, these watches were under $200 a piece. And these watches right now, without box, without paper, these watches still sell for around $12,000 a piece. So huge, huge appreciation, of course. And it's because, again, the collectors love vintage Rolex. Now, these both have the black matte dials, meaning that the black on the dial is not glossy. And they have tritium on the dial. Now, the tritium was hand applied back then in the early 60s. And you can see this one, the patina hasn't really aged evenly. And that might be because it was applied by hand, or this one, the patina is pretty perfect. Another thing to mention about the dials, these are meters first dial, meaning that the meters are mentioned first on the dial there, where it says 200 meters or 660 feet. Nowadays, the watches have the feet first. Another very vintage thing about these two vintage Rolexes are the bezel. The bezel does turn both ways, and as you can hear, it does not click at all. It just turns both ways. Now, it is kind of difficult to turn, so of course you could use it diving, but I believe another company had the patent on the unidirectional bezel, and Rolex had to wait until that patent expired until they could use that as well. But have a look at the patina on this one from the late 60s. How perfectly even is that, and how beautiful does that look? The 5513 always did have a Holes case, and of course these are no exception. These Rolexes also have an acrylic crystal. As you can see there, it is a plastic crystal. Not very scratch resistant, especially compared to the scratch resistance of sapphire. But you know, these vintage 5513s are highly collectible watches. And I'm very fortunate to have both of these watches on the channel. And how cool was that? 2 vintage 5513s. That patina was so even on the older one. And how cool was it seeing the acrylic crystal and seeing that Rolex was just using folded hollow metal for those bracelets back in the late 60s and early 70s. Very cool. And that wraps up another episode of It's Complicated. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, like this video, share it with all your friends, and I'll see you next time on another episode of It's Complicated.